the field of creativity studies, organizational creativity is a recent concept. In fact, one of the first serious papers on the topic of organizational creativity was published in the 1970s. Honestly, not much was written for the next 20 years, but then in the mid-1990s to today, there's been a tremendous increase in the books and journal articles on this topic. And recently, organizational creativity, mainly due to the interest in innovation, has received great attention in the mass media. Well, let's look at organizational creativity, what it means, and how to foster creative thinking in organizations. Let's start with an example. Here's a little sandwich that created an entire new industry, the Egg McMuffin. Many of you might not realize that before the 1970s, McDonald's, the fast food giant, served only lunch and dinner. Herb Peterson, McDonald's franchise owner in California, happened to really like Eggs Benedict, and as a consequence began thinking about how his restaurant might break into the breakfast market. He came up with the Egg McMuffin. When he showed it to Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, his initial reaction, and I quote, "It was a crazy idea," but then he tasted it and immediately saw the potential. Today, in the US, 25% of McDonald's sales come from breakfast. This generates in excess of 6 billion, that's with a B, sales annually. That's a happy story about how an organization spotted an opportunity, allowed a creative idea to bubble up within the organization, and then implemented the idea across the entire organization. Here's a counterexample, Blockbuster, and how they either were blind to a new opportunity or simply were inflexible. A recent New York Times article says it all. Netflix is beating Blockbuster with clicks, not bricks. Blockbuster was the giant at first, getting into the video rental business early. But the transition from one type of business system to another has proved to be extremely difficult, from bricks to clicks. And yet another option has appeared, which is to use other people's bricks as the vending machine approach featured by Redbox. That's putting machines in other company stores, such as grocery markets and pharmacies. Back to Blockbuster. They came to the click business model late, and then it took more than 3 years to integrate its bricks and click system together. What has Blockbuster's inability to be flexible resulted in? Well, in September of 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy, and today, most of its stores have gone out of business. So what is organizational creativity? Quite simply, this refers to an ability on the part of an organization to generate and implement original and useful ideas that enable an organization to better solve its own internal problems, as well as customers' problems. Let's take a closer look at the nature of organizational creativity. Here you have a creative person, let's say an entrepreneur, someone with a new and valuable idea. To get the idea out to the world, let's say a new product or service, he or she has to get organized. So this creative person begins to build systems. This eventually results in a very successful organization. Unfortunately, what generally happens is that the very spark of creativity that launched the organization often becomes squelched as the organization grows. Organizational creativity, in a way, is a compressed conflict. On one hand, you have the forces related to the word organization, such as efficiency, repeatability, predictability, and so forth, that run contrary to the forces of creativity. Looking at alternatives, doing things differently, experimenting, taking risks, and so forth. It boils down to risk minimization versus risk-taking. Organizations and everything inside of organizations are designed to sustain the present systems, which makes it difficult to be flexible and to adopt new directions. Yet the irony is, given the changing business, economic, and social conditions, to survive, organizations must continuously evolve and change. So what happens? After the initial startup, the organization becomes entrenched. And as a consequence, those individuals who have creative ideas cannot be heard. And sometimes they leave. A recent study claimed that most entrepreneurs get their breakthrough ideas while working for a former employer. So while the idea comes to mind while working for Acme Corporation, the creative person, due to his or her own frustration trying to get the creative idea accepted in this organization, will leave Acme Corporation and start his or her own entrepreneurial venture. And then this process starts up again. So how do you bring about creativity in organizations? Here's a systems model to explain this. It takes all the following elements to make an organization creative. The first element in the systems model is the person. Creative thinking begins with the creative imagination of a person. Organizations should seek to hire creative people and to develop the creative thinking of all associates. This leads to the second element, called process. To move from creativity by chance to creativity on demand, it is useful for organizations to adopt a deliberate creative process. That is, a structured approach that is adopted throughout the organization. Just as other organizational processes can be made more efficient through explicit practice, so is the case for creative thinking. When an explicit creative process, such as creative problem solving, is adopted, meetings become more productive, individual skill levels enhanced, and the organizational culture becomes much more innovative. This brings us to the third element, organizational environment. This refers to the psychological and physical atmosphere in the organization. Recent research has highlighted the fact that organizational climate can either do much to support creative thinking or kill it. And a survey conducted by the Boston Consulting Group discovered that the #1 barrier to innovation is a risk-averse organizational culture. When an organization has all three elements, creative people who are engaged in creative thinking processes in a supportive environment, this interaction is likely to lead to a creative outcome, a breakthrough, which might be a new product concept, a solution to a persistent problem, the identification of a new opportunity, and so on. And when this breakthrough idea is adopted within or outside the organization, such as in the marketplace, this is when innovation is truly realized. A final comment about this systems model. Just like moving parts in an engine require a lubricant, so do the individual elements in the systems model. The lubricant to organizational creativity is creative leadership. Without it, people do not feel supported, creative thinking processes are perceived as a threat, and an environment is established that squelches new ideas. So strongly do we believe in the importance of creative leadership that we have dedicated more and more of our graduate curriculum to this topic. And when organizations ask me to help them become more innovative, my first piece of advice is to focus on leadership development. For more on creative leadership, examine our book by this title or view the creative leadership video within the series. That brings us to the conclusion of this topic. No matter how you feel about fast food, you have to be impressed with McDonald's ability to flex with the times. Even today, this fast food giant continues to experiment with new ideas and concepts. For example, who would have thought that McDonald's would be able to take a bite out of Starbucks business? But McCafe seems to be doing just that.